thought of this evening to talk about An Elegant Woman. And I actually, because we went online in the spring, I did an event that was like the first event that I did for An Elegant Woman was at Hofstra. And this is essentially the last one for its publication. So it's a nice, I like that, a nice symmetry. This is the 17th annual Great Writers, Great Readings series. It was started by Philip Lopate with the support of President Rabinowitz. And when Philip left, I took over. And we've had, 17 years of just phenomenal writers coming to the series. So I'm so grateful for the support now of Dean Rifkin to make this possible. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk about my book, but I'm even more thrilled that I'm here with Robyn and Kristin. It just means the world to me. I met them early in my career at Hofstra. They were both, I can remember the classrooms, but I don't remember who I had first. Was it
together?
Kristin?
We were together.
You were together?
We were together.
Holy moly. Okay, I totally forgot that. But I know I had you in a few classes, and but I remember both of you. I remember Kristin's reading her work and asking her, are you a major? And she said, nope, I'm geology. And I said, oh no, you got to come over this way. And did you double major or major and minor?
I ended up double majoring.
And okay.
Yeah.
It was a great call. Kristin's written 2 novels, A Lily in the Light and A Frenzy of Sparks, which is coming out on election night.
Yeah.
That's its publication day. So we're going to do everything we can to celebrate it before and after and just keep it going. And she's just a terrific writer, and it's such an accomplishment to have 2 books published. Robyn, I can remember her first story that she wrote about a boy in the pandemic, the polio pandemic in New York City, and in the 30s or the 20s, and it was so powerful, and I immediately latched onto her, and we've stuck with it. I encouraged her to go to Columbia's MFA program, and she went. And she has a novel as well, How to Rewire a Family Tree, which is very funny and very serious, and it's finding its way into the world slowly but surely, and eventually definitely. And she also has another one that I think Kristin's reading right now or may have finished. So these are 2 former students that made me understand why teaching is just so great, and the exchange that happens between teacher and student and how we learn from each other. So I'm just so thrilled to be here with you guys, and then to see so many of my students past and present in these little Zoom squares. So thank you guys all for coming. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kristin.
And I feel incredibly honored to be here because when Robyn and I were students together at Hofstra, we used to go to this series, and I think we saw Murakami together, we saw Sharon Olds, John McPhee before I knew that was I think that was the thing that pulled me over from geology, because like I was reading so many of his books in my geology classroom and then realized like, oh, this is, you can also do writing with this. So it's such an honor to be here and to be part of the series and to honor An Elegant Woman tonight, which deserves all the due praise that it's gotten.
I just have to hold up the beautiful cover. I don't know if that if it's backwards for you guys, but it's a beautiful cover.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be here with both of you. I mean, I remember as an undergrad, it was so easy for me to just kind of become distracted, like internships and being in clubs and oh, like they're serving pizza in the common area, I gotta go. And these readings were just these moments of like motivation where I would get back to my dorm and just want to write so badly. So it's thrilling to be here and to celebrate your book, Martha, and thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. So I'm going to read, we're going to have a conversation, but I'm going to read briefly, just a couple of minutes from the opening to the book. It's a little bit in, but it sort of sets up some of the things I'm trying to do, in terms of process, and probably will help with give a little bit of context for the background of our conversation. Just so you know, the story is the story of a woman's life across the 20th century. It's the story of mothers and daughters and sisters and granddaughters, and it's really women against and this one particular woman against the backdrop of the 20th century, big history, a time in which so much changed and didn't for women. So this is a little bit into the first chapter. I don't think I need to say too much more to set it up. I am a novelist of sorts, using biographies of real people as jumping off points for the stories I tell. I have written 3 novels, all of which feature families playing central roles. Families for me are like countries. They both contain and create the subject, while a childhood shapes a life. Jean Barré was a subject, an impoverished orphan of an illiterate couple who grew up to circumnavigate the globe in the 18th century, dressed as a man. Jane Wilson, ethereal painter of the sky, raised in Dust Bowl, Oklahoma by a poet and an engineer, took long car trips across the country with her parents and her sisters, watching the changing landscape bookended by oceans, and Hypatia, earliest female mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, daughter of Theon, renowned mathematician, mother unknown, erased by history. I made it my job to resurrect this mother, and therefore Hypatia, through deduction. Now, after years of wanting to, I had trained my work on my grandmother, writing her story. This is what I told myself, what I told people who asked at parties what I was working on. It was good to have a clear, unimpeachable subject, one that was straightforward, but admitted just the same enough depth and complexity to keep things interesting. It put me at ease, and therefore my interrogator, gave me a sense of purpose, or at least a sense that I knew what I was doing with myself. More pointedly, I said on grant applications, for instance, that I was interested in my grandmother, born in 1904, dead in 2001, because her life had spanned a century in which so much had changed for women, and she, an ordinary, unhistoric person, was cast within the flow of big history. Whenever I thought of her against this backdrop, I felt a vista open up before me, a prairie emerging in the original sense of the word, forest suddenly giving way to the horizon and tall grass blowing in the wind. I felt that distant woman call to me, and so she became my subject, as she had always wanted to be for me. For years, I couldn't see, in the way you can never see the most important things for what they are, most likely because they present themselves in the form of endless rows of dusty basement boxes, that her story was mine. Not the details or the particulars, not the facts or the fabrications, but perhaps the one big fact, that she once was, and so was I. We were shaped differently by our times, by the ways in which we were raised and educated, of course. But what did my grandmother and I share? There was no way through this, I knew, but through the particulars. There were the particulars, for instance, of an epic, heroic past, some of it factual, some of it running parallel to fact, some of it orbiting in a broad elliptical path like Pluto around the truth, and some of it like the stories about the gods we give to constellations in the sky. We project the epic onto the sky to find in the chaos of the cosmos the patterns connecting star to star that give a snug fit to Orion's belt, to place in one's palm the ladle of the Big Dipper, and to receive a few practical orienting tricks that the Dipper's cup points true north. My own true north understood that there was something essential being done in my mother's basement, in sifting through and sorting out truth from fable, though even fables have something deeply true about them that outlasts us. My mother's disintegrating mind, our own unique and individual selves shuttling off into the unknown, a truth beyond the objects we tossed into the dumpster and the objects we held onto, a truth in the stories that would remain when we were dead and gone. If Glenna were a constellation, you could see her in the white teacher's smock, striding westward across the dew-wet grass of Montana, a rifle in one hand, Temple's notes to Shakespeare in the other. There wasn't room in the sky for a husband with a wandering eye, but that was where stories came in, to fill out an evening, to ask about duplicity and betrayal, the steady march of self-compromise that led to whatever cul-de-sac of banality one found oneself in, and then to wonder about what a genuine hero would do about such things. If my grandmother and her little sister Catherine were constellations, they would be in another part of the sky entirely. Grammy would be kneeling, facing east with her 43 Egyptian, just about ready to pick off a prairie dog. Her sister would be standing next to Grammy, looking west toward Glenna. The larger truth, the one that would outlast all of us, would be reflected in this constellation, this mise en scène. Stop there.
Gosh, now that we're all spellbound, we get to dive in, and we're going to ask so many questions, Martha. I have so many. But before we start, I just want to say that if anybody has questions, like as we're discussing, you can drop them into the Q&A, and we will read them all at the end, and we'll give you all a chance to speak too. So, Martha, why don't we kick it off? I know it took 10 years to write this stunning story, and that it's based on some family history. So I would love to know more about what it was about your family history that captivated you, and what made you want to capture it in fiction.
Well, I could say it took a lifetime, because this is the book that I was meant to write by my grandmother when I was even a child. She was telling these stories to us, my sisters and me. But I was captivated by the fact that she would tell me these stories, and this was the first novel I wanted to write, but I wasn't prepared technically. I didn't have the skills yet, because it's sweeping. It covers a lot of time and a lot of geography. It spans the country. It spans the 20th century. It goes back into the 19th century and beyond and before. But yeah, I was captivated because they were always stories about women, and there were very few men, and they were always doing heroic things, getting out of the Civil War with her, one ancestor with her. I'm actually in my grandmother's room. This is what we call it, and ancestors are all over the walls. I'm at my mom's house in New Jersey, but this is the Zoom room. So I was interested in why she was telling these stories to me, and they were obviously embellished, and she was not, she didn't care, she didn't adhere to the truth. She adhered to what would make the story better. And it was the fact that she cared enough to go, to give these stories to me and try to create a narrative sense of our, where we came from and where we're going.
There's this great line in the book. It's from Grammy, and she says, "The more I see of other people, the more I like myself." And I'm wondering, like, if your grandmother was reading this today, like, what would she say that you got right, and where would she maybe want to correct some of the storytelling?
Oh, she wouldn't. She would just say, "I've died and gone to heaven." She would be so proud and so happy, and mission accomplished. She would be thrilled.
One of the things that I was talking to Kristin about is that you've basically created like layers of fiction here. So you have a work of fiction led by a reliable narrator who has sometimes unreliable information, and sometimes reliable information, and how do you make that work? How do you make that compelling for the reader?
Well, that's why, first of all, I had to wait, until I was into my 50s to get this done, and why it took so long to write, because it was very hard to understand how to layer it. And so thank you for time and patience and a lot of tears and frustrations. But the thing about this book is it had there was a first draft that was slightly, it was very different in nature. It was longer and it was more experimental. I'm not going to go into it because it take too much time to explain, and then you'd think I was totally nuts. But it was when I revised it, I had to really it didn't work ultimately, that experimental version, and I had to revise it, and it took me a couple of years, and I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I was pointing in this direction of having an overarching narrator, Isadora, who you just heard, and much of the book is not from her point of view, but it all hinges on her point of view, but she goes into other points of view. And so the writing of this book was 8 years, a couple of months before I turned it into the editor. A friend of mine, Mona Simpson, suggested I read Carol Shields' The Stone Diaries. And I read that, and 2 months later, this book was done. Because she uses a similar narrator, and it gave me license to understand what I was doing. Mine's different, of course, but and I think that's important for students to understand. You can be so stuck, and then you read the right thing, and boom, you're unlocked.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about with the length of time that it took to kind of figure out, and just in general, I think in writing, for example, your book, there are moments where there's this like grandness. It kind of reminds me of being out in a field at night and just like staring up at the sky and seeing all the stars, and you just feel like there's this enormous universe out there, and it reminds you that you're nothing. And so there's this line when you're talking about the character Laura Ann, and it says, "A blip of a woman, does God exist? Does anyone care? Lifts were designed for the soles of her left shoes, but it didn't entirely correct the problem. Someone is about to shoot himself, someone else is not. Does anybody care?" And it kind of reminds me of this journey of writing and being in the publishing world, and we want to do these great things in our work, but does anybody care? And how do you not feel like a blip when you have those moments when things don't go the way you want them to go? How do you persevere and keep
you have to push through it. I mean, I put this book down for months on end. The blip, we're all blips. I mean, but I think my grandmother actually was trying to say something by connecting us back. Apparently we're descended from Mary Queen of Scots. That's how far back we go. But it's not, whoever her husband was, it's Mary Queen of Scots. And many, many, many women down from there. I think she was trying to, put us in a context of continuity. We're here, we're just for a nanosecond, but there's this other larger thing that is our ancestry and where we've come from and where we're going. But in terms of the writing and Robyn has this great novel, How to Rewire a Family Tree, and she's had some struggles with it that are so reminiscent of the ones that I've had with An Elegant Woman, that you push through it and you don't be afraid to take it all apart when you get yourself back up off the floor. of despair. You don't be afraid to pull it apart and rewire it, rewire the structure if that is going to serve you, or at a certain point, put it away and write something else, which is what Robyn has done. And she has, I said that, but you just push forward. That's the only way through is through.
I think you're actually highlighting two pieces of information that I learned from you when I was at Hofstra that have like stuck with me ever since. The first is that thing you used to say, writing is rewriting, right? And like just really not being afraid to take something that maybe you've invested a lot of time in and toss it. Just toss it because it's not working, and just kind of trust that like more words are going to come and they're going to fill up the page. And then the other thing you taught me once as an undergrad was I was struggling with writing, and you told me to just go out and live my life. And I'm not sure it was what I wanted to hear at the time, but like it was the best advice, I think, because like you're saying, you sometimes just putting something down that's not working and stepping away from it gives you a whole lot more perspective on what needs to happen next. And
even now, Martha, I'll give you a ring when I need a pep talk or something. Who is your Martha when you were a student? Who's your Martha?
I don't really know. I mean, maybe Mona Simpson. She was never a teacher, but she was a really good friend. My father introduced my sisters and I to her, and she became sort of a fifth McPhee sister, honorary McPhee. And she's 7 years older than I am, and she had already published her first novel Anywhere But Here. And I looked up to her so much, and we'd have long conversations, and we still do. She gave me this book, the Carol Shields book, and so maybe Mona, but really my mom, I've got to say. I mean, I don't have that anymore, but I had that for a lot of the writing of this book because she has dementia. But she was always encouraging me from a very young age to write. And in our family, I was the least likely to succeed. I wasn't a good student initially, as in elementary school, and she would tell me to keep journals and write stuff down. And the novel, my life as a fiction writer, and my life as a mentor, and my life as a journal writer are all things that I feel that she gave to me.
I wanted to ask about your family, because I know your family's very close, and it's not an easy thing to write about family history and to like interpret family history in a way that's, sometimes there's different opinions on that. And so I'm wondering like how your family felt about you tackling a project that's like very near and dear to everyone in a different way.
I am blessed because I come from a family of artists, so they all get it. They get what we do. They get what I'm doing, and I care most about my process as a writer, and running this series and being a part of this series for 17 years and listening to writers talk about their process makes me understand how everybody has their own. I find my stories right in front of me in my family. Most of them, a couple of my novels didn't, but my first two and this one certainly did. And but I was in my journal writing class. We were reading David Sedaris, and he said, people are people until they hit the page, then they become characters. And it's true, there's an immediate translation, along those lines, because this may be based on my grandmother, but I wasn't in Montana in 1910. So it's my imagination taking these little breadcrumbs and that, the little stories that she'd tell me, or the details about a fire or about the flu epidemic, or and I'd follow them and do the history. Why did they go to Montana? So and then discover, like, instead of California, and discover the history behind it or the context for it. I would read, other people's journals from the time to understand what it was like to be out there. So in the process of it becoming fiction, it moves further away from, the family. It becomes something else.
Kristin, you've had this
Yes.
Also, right? I mean, I know even my mother, she's always asking, am I in it? Am I in it? No, Mom, you're not in it. No, Mom. Don't worry, Mom.
The mom in How to Rewire a Family Tree is not your mom?
Is it? What was the question? Is it?
Yeah. Or I said, isn't she?
No, thank God.
Oh.
I think, of course, she's in a little of everything, just like all in a little of so many characters. Yeah, I mean, Kristin.
Yeah, I found, so my first story, A Lily in the Light, is a sibling story, and I found that my siblings, when they read it, they were just looking for themselves. They're like, oh, page 30, like the toy, that was mine when I was a child. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. But, there's, none of us were professional ballet dancers. So clearly it's not based really on any of us, right? And then even for my most recent one, A Frenzy of Sparks, it's like, it was inspired by and some true family history, which was difficult to write about. But I feel in many ways like I wrote that book with my dad, because it was very much a story from his childhood that I wanted to turn into fiction. So I invited him in to be part of the writing process, but like the research process. And it's tricky. It's like when your family knows that you're writing about something that's been inspired by them. There's almost like this. I think my dad thought that I was writing like a bio of him, of his childhood. I was like, that's not what's going to happen here, Dad. Like, it's going to turn into fiction. And I think he was a little disappointed when I chose a 13-year-old girl as the narrator instead of him. But I did feel like a good amount of pressure to try to like that push and pull of like wanting to stay true to what historically happened, but also letting the characters do what they're going to do on the page. And sometimes that gets like further away from whatever inspired the story in the first place. So I'm wondering if you felt that too, if you felt that sort of like wanting to stay true or just letting it run and be fiction, or where you found that line between the two.
I maybe because I've done this, this is the 5th time I've done this. Yeah. I don't have that. I definitely had it with my first novel, which was, very much about, my parents' divorce basically, and my mother's remarriage to this hippie. And, it was very much about the 1970, that period and transition in America. And I was really worried about it. And in fact, really worried about my dad, because he's a public figure. And I thought he would get so upset and be really, he read it and he said, Martha, you have egregious spelling errors in this book. And then he took me through it with the special pencil, and he as he was reading it, he corrected them all. Oh, they were awful. Thank God for spell check and in time. So he never mentioned anything about the divorce and any similarities, and that was a painful period in our family's history. So maybe I felt it there, but by now, 5 books later, and all of us old and completely developed in our artistic fields, we get it and and totally understand. My father already understood it back then, what happens in the process. So I don't feel that. My concern is that I'm getting the story right. There I feel the pressure to, that I want to move people. I want the language to be great, and I want to be saying something. So that's the area.
Excuse me, I look at the 2 books, one that I finished and the one that I'm writing now, and the one that I finished, I look at and I say, it's so meaningful and it has so many problems. And then I look at the other one and I say, it doesn't mean much, but it has no problem. And you had mentioned that this was kind of the book that you were waiting to write and the book that you were meant to write. And I had asked you this on the phone once, so this is kind of a question, but I'm wondering, when you were writing your first 4 books, in the back of your head, where you're like, just kind of like waiting to work on this one and to unlock what you needed to make it work?
Yeah, it was always there. I looked back in early journals recently for a different purpose, and I could see that I was starting to draft the story, and poorly, just when I was at Columbia, so a long time ago, and I didn't have the grasp, and then I didn't think about it for the second or the third. But when I sold the fourth, when I sold the third, it was a 2-book deal, I guess, and the second was totally unwritten. It was one sentence, a woman's life across the 20th century, but I wrote Dear Money instead. It just fell in my lap, and then I got to this. So it was. I don't know. I got there finally, and it makes me think about you. And as I said to you, I was in the garden while we were talking, so I'm picturing myself there. I said, don't give up on it. Don't give up on it. If I had written this book first, it probably would have needed to sit for a while before I was going to get it right, clearly. So just allow yourself, you're such good writers. These two are just such good writers. And I have no doubt that it's going to figure itself out for you. Just stick with it.
It's almost like we paid Martha to be here tonight, but like we didn't do that. It's interesting because like when I think about, so just so everybody, the secret's out, I have a novel that's in a drawer too, that like there's the 2 that I published, and there's one that's in a drawer, and truthfully it belongs there, right? And so, but the thing is that like there's all that time that you take to like grow as a writer. And Martha, Robyn and I were adding up all of the risks that you took, like just structurally and like from a character's perspective. I mean, I'll name some. So number 1, it covers a ton of time, right? Like we're talking multiple people over really long periods of time. You've got like a bookended character who's kicking off and sort of ending off the story, but then there's a whole bunch of change in like point of view throughout. Robyn, what else did we come up with as far as like, like a not always reliable, like a reliable narrator, but who doesn't have
the layers of fiction from earlier, yeah.
Yeah, and we all know that the publishing world is finicky, right? Like I think sometimes
different points of view.
Yeah, I mean, I can think back to like some of my own like query letters or responses from editors or those from my friends that were like, well, I liked this character's point of view, but not this one. And, I think it covers too much time, doesn't cover enough time. Like, there's no way to make everybody happy in publishing, but what made you feel like really 100% confident that like, this was the book, this was the way it needed to be told, and like, you can't tell me otherwise. Here it is, world. Here's the book.
Well, I struggled enormously, as you can. I mean, it took all that time, but I knew, even with the first draft, I knew that the first sort of third of the book was going to be the grandmother's point of view. And then it was going to go into these other points of view, because basically her life was more interesting in the beginning. Once she becomes an elegant woman, she becomes bourgeois and a lot less interesting. But I wanted her to be seen, but along the way, she's also mythologizing herself. She's sort of turning herself into a myth. So I wanted that mythic side of her to be seen sort of kaleidoscopically by these other people, and the granddaughter, her daughter, and various other characters. So I knew I wanted to look at it in that way. Risk is, it's important to risk and to try and to do. And I have a great friend who's really great editor, Elizabeth Schmitz at Grove Atlantic, and she said recently she had, oh yes, Robyn.
I used to babysit her kids.
Yeah. She said recently she had to turn down somebody who's an author of hers, and the thing she said is, writers can forget that it's a business. You know, we have to sell books. So you sort of do have to, you know, be a little bit aware, but you also don't at the same time, because if I were to be thinking, what does the publishing industry want? I would just give up right now, because I would have no idea. Yeah, I mean, or I wouldn't know how to marry that to what it is that I feel like I'm needing to create. But you do have to be aware that it is a business.
Yeah, no, and even sometimes when I'm writing, I'm thinking like, oh, you know, this scene, if I could get this picture next to the river, would be so Instagrammable. And then I'm like, stop, like back to the dialogue, because right. Once it becomes like, once your books are out in the world, it does become, you know, you're the author, but you're also the author marketer too. Marketer, that's the word, right? So you are kind of, right, promoter, self-promoter. So you're always kind of walking that line of like doing both, but I agree that it's really important to just shut that off when you're crafting the story. Yeah.
And eventually someone will tell you. Like I had this big, you know, experimental is the word, ambitious experimental, and it wasn't working, and people let me know. So so I went back to the drawing board with the material, and this is where I speak to you, Robyn, and, you know, don't be afraid to go back or to start something new and then go back.
One day. For now, I'm just working on something that's, you know, relatively meaningless to me.
Yeah, but there's no such thing. Like it might seem that way at first, but as you like delve in, you'll there's a reason that it's coming from you, right?
Yeah. I'm interested in the topic. I think, you know, I keep referencing this call that we had, Martha, but you said something about writing, or was it reading a book for the time? So like, I kind of look at this as or was it writing a book for the time? You know, I have 2 kids, I have a full-time job, and
no, that's what we were talking about. You had said you're writing in small bursts, and this is interesting in terms of process. She has 2 babies basically, and well, a baby and a toddler or a 4-year-old, and but I mean, my God, it gets harder actually when they're teenagers. Oh my God. But you do have to adjust a little bit. You know, that you're writing in vignettes, I believe you said, like small chapters or small. So
it's just the chapters read easy. That's, I think, the best way to put it.
This is part of the development of yourselves as writers, is understanding what, you know, how understanding your process and understanding how you can use the time that you have. Robyn also works full time, and she has 2 small children. So, and she's written a whole new novel, you know, in a year? So this is amazing time management, and discipline, which is, you know, one of the key ingredients here. I realize that it's 7:12.
Yeah.
Should we see if there are any questions?
I mean, like I can keep talking, so let's cut that off and let all of these fine people ask some questions. So if you have a question, do we want to just unmute? Is that okay? Can people just unmute? And
yeah. There's some in over here. I mean, there are comments. I don't know if questions, but
and if you're shy, is the bowl in the novel a real thing? And if you have it in the home where you are now, can you show it to us?
I wish I could show it to you. It is a real thing. Well, there's debate. Did she pick it up at a flea market and put, you know, this story on it? But there was this bowl that sat on the melodeon in her house, which was called Last Tomorrow. in Ogunquit, Maine, that she would tell us had been carried by Nancy Cooper Slagle when her husband died of amoebic dysentery in Libby prison. And Nancy was a Yankee in the Confederate South, and took her 7 children, one a newborn baby Teresa, and hiked from Richmond to his family in Ohio. And she carried this bowl with Temple's notes to Shakespeare and the Bible, and baby Teresa died along the way. And that was my grandmother's story. And there's so much, I love that story because who knows whether it's true or not, but there's probably a shard of truth. But the detail, the Bible, the bowl, and it would sit there and she'd say, what would you like when I'm dead and gone? And then she'd tell us the story about the object. And what I love about them, the stories, is the specificity. Libby prison, amoebic dysentery, and yes, but a long answer for yes, there is a bowl, but my sister took it. So she has it. I tried to get it back. I said, I really need it for the research for this novel. I need to see it again. Will you send it to me? And she did not abide.
Can I ask you another question, as though I haven't taken up enough time? So I think you might have taught a class on this, Matt Pikowski, who I promised I would not name. Here I am.
Hi, Matt.
Hello.
So I think you had taught a class on research, right?
Yeah.
And of history in this book, and I'm wondering how much research you had to do versus what you kind of already knew, and how do you make history interesting?
Well, how do you feed your imagination? That's part of the question. I feed it by watching the family stories and listening to them, and in this case, doing a bundle of research. Actually, all of my novels have a lot of research. And so I travel. I went to Montana and London and Paris, the places that are in the novel. And it's a lot of research, because I didn't, as I said earlier, I knew my grandmother went to Montana as a little girl in 1910. She would tell us the stories of Montana, but she didn't tell us why. So I researched, other than that they were escaping, they were leaving the husband, but why Montana as opposed to California or somewhere else, the East Coast? And when I started the research, I learned about the Enlarged Homestead Act of 1909. The railroads were trying to populate Montana, which had only, a few years before been described in children's textbooks as desert. So that they were bringing people in and giving them a bunch of acreage to prove up within 5 years to show that they could make a farm. And this was drawing a lot of people. And so I learned all about this, and it was fascinating. Learned about the railroads, got into, timetables and stories from the Great Northern, that they had a magazine. And you sort of can go down a rabbit hole. And the question is, when do you stop? And that's something we talk a lot about in that class, because, if you're curious and research is great for procrastination, and you can really, disappear.
We have a question from Justine. Justine is wondering if you ever feel weird when those on which you base your characters actually read themselves in the text, especially if the comparisons are a little negative.
Okay, Mona Simpson told me long ago, if the character isn't, is a little naughty or whatever, just make her beautiful, and then they'll be happy.
And she also adds like a follow-up in there too, and she wants to know if there's any family topics that are off limits, either because it would offend people in your family or out of fear of public response.
you know, look, yes. I mean, nobody says, oh, I mean, actually, my sister Laura said, don't write about that. But there are things. There are some very big things that I just would not write about because it would cause pain. And I'm not interested in causing pain. That's not, you know, that's not what this is about. So I would stay far away from anything like that. So, yeah.
Looks like we have another question. Dominique asks, I know you have been writing this novel for a long time now, but at any point did you question finishing it? If so, what motivated you to keep going?
Oh gosh, you know, this was this was really challenging. I didn't think that Gorgeous Lies was my second novel, and I never thought that I would have that kind of struggle again, and this was twice as bad. It was just really, really hard. There's confidence issues, you know, teenage children, just everything coming together. And so I stopped a lot. I put it down, and, you know, I can think that I'm, you know, not being productive, but I started 3 other things. I have a draft of another novel. So I went off in these different directions, but it was hard. I didn't give up because, you know, maybe, you know, I was channeling my grandmother. I knew there was something here. I knew that I had this story to tell, and just when I thought I was done with it or given up with it, something good would happen and it would pull me back to it. I'd sell a chapter as a short story, or I sold the novel before I was finished revising that messy draft. And so I had these good, you know, things happen that encouraged me, but basically it was just me pushing through.
And Dominique, if you're asking that because you're working on something and you're like, should I finish this? I think I've quit on everything I've ever finished at least once in the writing process. So, you know, it's fine. You can temporarily quit. No one's making you do this, right? So if you need to step away from it for a little while, then go for it.
But I think you make an important point there that it's ended up in the drawer at least once, everything you've ever finished. And that is really true, that, you know, if you don't, like anything in life, if you give up too easily, then you'll just keep giving up. It's like, it's a hard precedent. Although when it needs to be given up, it does, you know, you have to do that too. So it's a fine line, understanding which way to go. But I'd say push toward not giving up if it's deeply meaningful to you.
And even if it's not deeply meaningful I mean, sometimes things become more meaningful as you explore them on the page too. And this is sort of what I was trying to nudge you on before, Robyn. It's like there's a reason you started it in the first place, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of soul searching to figure out like what it is that's drawing you there. And maybe there's an emotional pot that you need to draw from in order to complete the story that you're not ready to tap into yet. And there's been things where I'm writing, I'm like, ooh, I have to go there. I don't know if I'm ready to go there, you know, because like I write and I put the pen down, but then the story sticks with me for the rest of the day and the week, and then maybe I'm fighting with my husband, right? And so, you know, it's fine. I think sometimes it's just a being honest about where you are.
You know, again, all this is all about understanding, and to all the students and writers that are here, understanding your process. In the very beginning, I would say, oh, I'm doing this all wrong. For years, actually, I'm doing this all wrong. I'm doing this, I wrote a novel and then another one. I'm doing this all wrong. And, but just understanding your process, that I get up early, that's mine. And I work at, you know, from 4 to whenever. And that I, you know, write really slowly, that I put it away, that I come back to. Understanding whatever your process is fundamental.
Ben has a question. How did you know that you were finished? When I'm working on a project, I always feel like I can revise part of my text here or there, and often I'm finished by default when the deadline hits.
No, because I had such an understanding editor. I mean, And it took me a really long time to get to it. But when I wrote, well, it was, I knew twice that I was, well, when I wrote the last chapter, it was the easiest of all of the work, and it came out almost as it is in the novel. And I felt just so on fire and alive, and like I knew I had it right, and it was so exciting. And then and this was before actually I had totally understood what I was doing, that Carol Shields helped me understand. And then when I went back and revised this very good draft, but feeling the confidence that that book gave me, and then when I got to the end, I knew it was done. It was time to go, and that it wouldn't need much from there. So it was those two things.
I feel like I'm done when I want to burn it and never see it again. I think that's my honest, when I no longer, I feel like not one more second I can look at this is when it's done.
I can't reread my books, however. Once this tour is finished, the paperback comes out next year, and I won't ever look at it again. That does happen, but I knew it was finished before.
We have a couple more questions coming in. Glenn is asking, have you found that writing something based on your family has affected any of your relationships or changed your perspective about your relatives in some significant way, good or bad?
Not really, because it's like I said, once the person hits the page, they become something else. So maybe I've understood what my grandmother was trying to get at, by telling all these stories, but I don't have a different opinion of her. And her mother, who I heard stories about a lot, I never knew her. She's totally based on, stories I'd heard, but what my imagination made of her, the Glenna character. So in fact, the characters in the novel are in the first part, in the old generation part of the novel, are all named. Those are their real names. My grandmother was Tommy. Thelma, my great grandmother, who's on the wall over there, was Glenna. But I sort of did that because they were like fictional characters to me in a way. I didn't need to change their names. I didn't want to change their names. The new generation, they're all different, and the story is different. I've already mined that territory of my family in my first and second novels, so they're not us, even though they're a bunch of sisters.
Okay, we have a question from Matt. Yeah. Would you say that the nonfiction aspects of this novel made it easier to write or more difficult? In other words, was it helpful to have a family history and artifacts to research, or do you feel this limited what you could imagine and pursue in your early drafts?
No, I feel like it's just the way my imagination works. Even the story I'm working, the novel that I have a draft of now, is actually sort of, it's not a sequel to this, but it is it's a love story that's in this novel, but not really explored, between Arthur and Winter, and it's that story. But it's just the way my mind works. That Arthur and Winter are completely invented, but the narrator is more aligned with me, and the narrator is telling her mother the story of this big love story that she lived, and she can't remember because she has dementia. So you can see, I have a mother who has dementia. This narrator is Zadora, who's more closely aligned with me, but Winter, who would be my mother, isn't my mother at all. And Arthur is nobody that I know. Like, he's a bunch of different people put together. So that's sort of how I see it. Yeah, but the research certainly helps, because then you can understand, the material you're writing about, the time period you're writing about. You can get those details that make the story about Nancy Cooper Slagle's husband dying, if he's just dying, that, you know, that says something. But if he dies in Libby prison of amoebic dysentery, it says a little bit more. It puts you in that time, and it gives you an illness of that time and a famous prison of that time. And it helps anchor. So the details feed, you know, the research feeds all of that.
Okay, and Nisa says, in high school, I was discouraged from continuing to write because by many of my teachers and family members. Despite their feedback, I did continue and have since been able to discover the enjoyment and passion that I have for writing. So I was wondering if you have had a similar experience, or if there were ever people in your life that made you feel discouraged about being a writer, and how you looked past those negative comments.
Well, no, look, you get reviews, right? Whoa. And they can be sort of painful. And they can be exhilarating too. And my father, who's had much experience, says, so you're going to pay attention to the negative ones, but not the positive ones. You know, like you have to, they're a wash. Like you just have to keep going. And I'd say it's the reviews that were the closest to what you're asking about there. Because when I was younger, as I said earlier, I wasn't a good student. No, like I was not the person in our family who they thought would go on to become a novelist. And if I had ever, you know, been discouraged by my academic performance early on, not in high school and college, I did well, but you know, that would have been a terrible thing. So if a high school teachers shouldn't discourage people from writing creatively. They just shouldn't. But you just keep going. Like I have to keep going through those bad reviews, you know, that I've had over time. You just keep marching forward. And
they hurt. They hurt. Bad reviews hurt. It doesn't matter how many good ones you get. When you get a 1-star review and someone says your book sucks, like it's all, I mean, all right. Like I've learned a little bit more to like write it off now, but it just sticks with you. And it doesn't matter how many good ones there are. I mean, I've called Robyn and been like, listen to this, like, and read her the bad ones, you know, because for some reason they just cut really deep. But at the end of the day, I think you write for you. Like you write because there's something that you need to explore on the page. And maybe someday you will want to show it to the world, and maybe someday you'll decide never to do that. But the point is you write for you, and the story and those characters have to have like a special place that is worth spending time with them. So I think write to that, and don't try, as hard as it is, try not to write for feedback, because I think we all want it, but you don't need the feedback to be a writer in many ways. So.
So we've run out of time. We'll take one more question. You want to choose one more, and then if there's a way to whoever's Ginny or Carol, I'd love to see the comments. If there's a way to save those for later, because it looks like there's some good questions in there. But yeah, you want to ask one more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Robyn, you can pick.
Oh boy. Okay, pressure. Okay. Kelly McMasters. I just read Darren Strauss's lovely Queen of Tuesday family memoir novel hybrid involving his grandfather's affair with Lucille Ball.
Ooh.
He said he felt the mixed genre helped him push to a deeper level of truth than either only fiction or only memoir could have achieved. Was this freeing for you to mix both genres? Did you find any models in nonfiction or other hybrid books to help you find your way? And she loved Stone Diaries.
You know, I am a fiction writer. Even I used to write essays for magazines like Vogue and, you know, Elle, and, you know, I wrote for years. I supplemented my income writing these things. And my family would always say, those are more fictional than your fiction. I am a fiction writer. So I don't even know that I really understand a hybrid, you know, memoir fiction. I don't see this novel as anything, you know, but fiction. And and I don't know if I completely understand, you know, because it's not my story. So I'm using fiction to inhabit other characters. And, you know, I would read a lot of different things, and a lot of different books inspired me along the way, but and they could have been nonfiction, they could have been fiction. It's made more in the energy of the prose and the excitement to write. But really, the Stone Diaries is the only one where the light bulb went off about this book. I don't want this to end. I wish we were all in person and that we could go have a party somewhere and eat something delicious. And but these are weird times, and I'm grateful to Zoom and Hofstra, and now especially Kristin and Robyn for doing this with me, and to all of you for coming. It's really such a joy. So good evening.
See you at Hofstra USA when the pandemic's over.
Yes. Okay. We'll do a redo. We'll have you for your books. Stay safe and be well. And goodbye. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.